Hello, Internet. This is Attila Yeşilada in his dark den of inequity, once again sprouting untruths about Turkey, politics, and the world at large. Today, we're going to talk about the Ukrainian counterattack in Kharkiv and Kherson regions. If I'm butchering the names of these two brave towns, my sincerest apologies to all Ukrainians. Uh, I am not an expert on Ukraine or Russia, and though, you know, philosophically and personally, I am on the side of Ukraine, I'm going to be as neutral as possible in this commentary. I'm not going to talk about the developments in the war. I want to talk about the consequences of the Ukraine counterattack on the world economy, and of course, most importantly, for Turkey. For Turkey, if things don't go the way Putin had imagined, there could be daunting economic as well as political impacts. Once again, perhaps I'm rushing this video a little bit. I should have provided a lot of links, but to a large extent, the views expressed here regarding the consequences of Ukraine's counterattack and its implications for Putin's strategy and, of course, the world economy are not my personal views. These are derived from what I consider to be reliable publications. Of course, I construct the scenarios about Turkey personally. Now, first of all, even though I would want to believe otherwise, Ukraine army's victories in Kharkiv and to a lesser extent in Kherson doesn't guarantee a Ukraine victory in this war. History and recent precedent has taught us that wars are won not only by the bravery of the foot soldiers and the intelligence of the general staff, but by superiority in person power, military equipment, and most importantly, economy. At this point, Ukraine probably cannot sustain this offensive more than a couple of weeks. It will probably conquer more territory, but along with the onset of the winter, which obviously makes war conditions more difficult, things will mutate into a trench war, which will last for years to come. But that's not important. Ukraine has proved to the world that it can push Russia back or prevent Putin from achieving his overall objective of destroying Ukrainian independence and proving to the world that Russian armor, Russian military technology is superior to the West and that he is an actor that needs to be reckoned in the global stage along with Xi Jinping, Biden, and the representatives of EU. Now, Putin, in that sense, has lost the war. There is no way he is going to conquer even the entirety of the Donbass region or push further into Ukraine. It's 100% certain that Ukraine will remain an independent country. And moreover, if EU so wishes, it will be accepted into a EU partnership program. In a sense, with this counterattack, Ukraine guaranteed its independence and its place in the uh, pantheon of pro-Western nations, for the lack of a better word, for Christ's sake. And here the consequences start for the West, for Putin, and for Turkey. For the West, the first lesson to be drawn from the Ukrainian counterattack and its unexpected success is that the investment made in terms of financial aid and military aid for Ukraine is not wasted. It does deliver results. Therefore, United States, EU, and other nations that are in partnership with Ukraine are going to redouble the delivery of money and military supplies to Ukraine. Moreover, in Europe, obviously, Russia's blackmail of cutting off energy supplies is going down extremely hard with the ordinary woman on the street. And I think there's a lot of grumbling in Germany, Italy, Czech Republic. I know for sure that perhaps helping Ukraine is not the best idea. Ukraine may not be worth suffering the excruciating increases in energy prices for the European population in excess of 300 million. Now, these doubts are dispelled. Even though the women on the street may still protest, I think EU nations are now determined to help Ukraine and suffer, whatever retaliation Putin is going to throw their way. Now, for Putin, the stakes are even bigger. Russian leaders, be they czars or Soviet presidents, and Putin survive by victories. They have really never given their nation much in terms of democracy, human rights, or even economic development. But Russia is a nationalistic country, a patriotic country, and they believe they are a world power. And of course, these victories increase their commitment to Putin and to suffering whatever hardship the war brings. Now, obviously, Putin's defeat is unimaginable from Putin's viewpoint. Already, not the liberals and pacifists, but ultranationalists are raising their voices against Putin because they are deeply frustrated. They had expected Putin to roll over Ukraine in a week and declare victory and then push on to the Baltic republics, wherever he wants to go, Transdniester in Romania, for instance. But now they realize these objectives are completely out of reach. This is going to mutate into a trench war, which means more young Russian men and women will be drafted into armed forces. There will be more body bags coming back, and these are extremely annoying. Moreover, we're seeing the first decline in Russia's energy revenues, export revenues, which of course is going to reflect as lower or more restrained welfare spending at the time when Russian economy is not doing too well. So Putin can potentially lose his power, be dethroned by one way or other, or have to contend with years of social unrest in his home country if he gives up on Ukraine. A military victory is not easy, so Putin has two options. First, the nuclear option. Second, the economic option. The nuclear option is to create a nuclear incident in Ukraine. It could be attack in Ukraine proper with a tactical nuclear bomb which spreads relatively little radiation beyond the radius of, say, 100 miles. Or there's a nuclear power plant there, the name of which I can never pronounce, Zaporizhzhia. Again, Ukrainians, I deserve all the bad comments and cursing that you may put down below in the comment section. Please don't spare me. Um, but, an accident can be engineered whereby we have another Chernobyl or Fukushima. And that obviously is disastrous for Europe as well as Turkey because radiation will spread with the prevailing winds. This way, Putin will make credible his threat of using the nuclear option and hope that it can persuade the West either to give up on its support of Ukraine or force Ukraine into a peace settlement that's favorable or face-saving to Putin. Again, having described this, I may or may not like Putin. I don't. That's obvious. I don't like Xi Jinping, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong, whatever, or Erdogan. I don't like any of the dictators of this world. But I think Putin is rational in the sense of a chess player. And he understands the consequences of creating a nuclear incident. So he has a second option, which is the economic annihilation option, which is not only cutting natural gas to Europe, but cutting off exports of all vital energy and raw materials to countries that cooperate with Ukraine. Remember, Russia is also a very important exporter of uranium, which we use in nuclear power plants, iron and steel, cobalt, I believe, nickel, um, not to mention, of course, fertilizers and grains. And Russia imposing embargoes on nations that cooperate with Ukraine is a very scary thought. Now remember already G7 is discussing and will probably slap a ceiling price for Russian exported oil, which means Russian oil revenues will go down in any case. So Russian retaliation is not an outlandish scenario. Now, obviously, not exporting anything to unfriendly nations is extremely costly for Putin, but you gotta remember the guy is in dire straits and he doesn't have too many options to save his regime. So he may try that. Assuming this happens, what will be the consequences for the world? A, of course, the global perception of geostrategic risk will increase, which will reflect poorly on credit flows, on risky assets, and on what we call global financial conditions. Every country that depends on dollar or euro credit or Japanese yen credit will be hurt because it will have to pay higher interest expenses. More importantly, of course, you know, higher global risk, lower trade. If Russia resorts to this scenario of economic annihilation, then of course the world will enter a deeper recession than currently imagined. Now we're moving slightly towards Turkey. Of course, everyone already knows EU is in recession, which would have lasted 2 quarters and would have probably shaved off 2 percentage points from European GDP. Now, in the nuclear annihilation scenario, we're talking about doubling the costs. So probably a year-long recession. ECB still going on with rate increases because inflation is now higher, and a loss of potential output equal to 4% of the current. Now remember, 50% of Turkish exports go to EU. So EU's recession immediately entails lower export growth or perhaps a reduction in exports for Turkey. There is a second angle here. Over the last few weeks, futures markets have started pricing lower energy and commodities prices for 2023. That may no longer be realistic. At least in food and energy, where I have some expertise, I don't know much about uranium or nickel or cobalt or iron and steel. We may be talking about Brent prices shooting back to $120 per barrel. Currently, they're at 92, I believe. According to FAO, food prices across the globe have been declining for 3 months. That may be reversed, and coupled with the nasty effects on harvests of the climate change, we could have a winter of food shortages and another round of food price hikes, which would sit very ill with global inflation. And of course, it will devastate Turkey because we import 75% of our energy needs. Already, our natural gas bill, which is 1/3 of our total energy imports, could rise as much as tenfold, judging by European prices. I mean, last year we imported $30 billion worth of energy from Russia, so imagine that rising to something like $80 billion. Now, Turkey has a current account deficit problem, which means our foreign exchange revenues fall far short of our foreign exchange expenditures. Our external account is in an eternal deficit. Before the Ukrainian counterattack, the consensus estimate for Turkey's current account deficit for the next 12 months, July to July, was roughly $40 billion. Now, based on the scenario I just described, we could be talking about a $60 billion current account deficit. And remember, it is the Turkish central bank which has to finance this deficit, and the central bank has at best, $40 billion worth of liquid dollar reserves. So, if Turkey's energy bill goes up substantially, coupled with a reduction in exports, obviously everyone who needs to import or pay off debt will come to the central bank, and central bank will say, "I'm sorry, I really don't have the dollars, to help you pay off your foreign obligations." That means default. Even if it doesn't reach that alarming level, we're talking about another bout of um, currency shock, which I have described below in several videos. When I shot this video, dollar TL was trading about 18.25. It could go to 22, 23, 24, which means much higher inflation, social unrest, and a substantial reduction in Erdogan's approval ratings. These have now become very realistic scenarios. As importantly, EU is also the number one exporter to Turkey. We buy a lot of chemicals, plastics, and investment goods for EU. And if you read the Global Plus, you will see a lot of European heavy industries shutting down simply because it doesn't make sense to produce under these high energy prices. So, in addition to a higher energy bill, we could also have shortages in key commodities like fertilizers and plastics. And of course, the global increase in energy and food prices will have to be reflected domestic prices, given that as of August, Turkish inflation, CPI inflation, is at 80%. We're now talking about triple digit or hyperinflation. So this is an extremely nasty scenario. That's the economic aspect. But the political aspect is scary for Erdogan, not for Turkey, but for Erdogan. Because Erdogan was hoping his good pal, Putin, will bankroll his election campaign. He has, talked to Putin several times. In specific, he hopes that Russian wealth funds or entities will buy Turkish liras or buy Turkish assets, thereby injecting dollars into central bank. He openly expressed his hope that he can convince Putin to sell natural gas either at a discount or on credit. Now remember, Turkish elections will be held next May or June. So if Erdogan can persuade Putin to pay for natural gas that Turkey imports from Russia, not now, but after the elections, he will have a war chest. He will be able to keep energy prices at the current level or even provide discounts to households in the winter, which obviously is good for his poll ratings. We have already seen in July balance of payments unprecedentedly high amount of unidentified money coming into Turkey. Now, I'm not saying it's all Russian money. It could be Azeri money. It could be Erdogan's Turkish pals repatriating their wealth at home, abroad, to help Erdogan win the elections. It could be cocaine money. I plan to shoot another video on that, but Turkey is becoming the drug smuggling center for Europe and Middle East. But anyhow, if Putin is cutting off exports to the West, then obviously the Russian budget and the central bank reserves will suffer, and he will be less willing or able to help Erdogan win the election. So if Erdogan is expecting a $20 billion favor, for instance, Putin may be able to afford only $10 billion, and that's really pretty disastrous for Erdogan. So if my scenarios is correct, then Mr. Erdogan's scenarios or strategy for winning elections is in deep doo-doo too. There's another important point. I can't really prove it, but there is deep suspicion in Western capitals that Turkish companies are already cooperating with their counterparts, and perhaps even some commercial banks cooperating with Russian banks to help Russia bypass sanctions. Now, again, as I've said, proof is sketchy, and I don't want to really accuse anyone, but it's really not my opinion that counts. If you read the Financial Times, Bloomberg, Business Insider, whatever, you'll excuse me. Why do I care? I'm not going to make it through the winter. But there's deep suspicion in Western capitals that either Ankara is displaying benign negligence towards these efforts to break Russian sanctions or actively encouraging Turkish companies and banks to help Russian entities so Mr. Erdogan can get more financial favors from Putin. Now, West is pretty certain that Turkey is up to no good. The debate is about whether the cheating by Turkey is worth imposing sanctions on Turkey, simply because Turkey is a useful tool. I mean, Erdogan may be anti-Western and definitely an anti-Semite, there is no doubt about it, but he also is the only man who can talk to Putin and Zelensky at the same time. Not only that, he can also talk to Azerbaijan and Armenians. He could, you might have heard that Azerbaijan and Armenia are at it again. Border violations claim both sides. I really don't know which one is guilty at this one. Doesn't make a difference. But if Erdogan advises Azerbaijan to hold off on a major offensive on Armenia or seek peace or a negotiated settlement to their border conflicts, obviously that would be doing a great service to the West. Turkey is also good with Kazakhstan, helps to stabilize Balkans, etc., etc. In other words, whether the West has deep suspicions about Erdogan or not, at times he can be helpful. So, up until the Ukrainian counteroffensive and these scenarios I described, the prevailing attitude in the West was, yeah, Turkey is going to cheat somewhat with these sanctions, but, we'll let Erdogan get away with it because we get so much from him in return. Now the calculus has changed completely. The West thinks Russia is on the run, and it has probably reached an opportunity to completely undermine Russian imperialism. I'm using Western terms to describe it. Since Gorbachev's rise to power in 1980s, they could deal a final blow to Putin's expansionist aims. Therefore, they are much less willing to tolerate any Turkish sanctions breaking. In summary, even though I don't expect Turkish conduct to get worse because of Putin's needs, the possibility of Westerners imposing very painful economic and financial sanctions on Turkey because of that misconduct has increased substantially. All in all, if I am correct in my view that to turn the tide of the war in Ukraine, Russia will go all out in terms of blackmailing the West. We are cutting exports of crucial raw materials, energy, and commodities. Then Turkey will be collateral damage. I have shot another video about that 6 months ago. And from a political viewpoint, Erdogan's hopes of winning elections with the help of his pal Putin will be frustrated. I, in any case, don't think Erdogan is going to win again, and I've, shot a video about that. So, this is the gist of today's video in 23 minutes. Thank you very much for your comments. Please keep watching the channel. Subscribe if you like the content, but more importantly, please share it with anyone you know who is interested in Turkey for one reason or other. Atilla Yeşilada saying goodbye from Istanbul on behalf of the Real Turkey channel.